Want to hear something crazy? Time travel is real. And today, I'm gonna prove it. There are a huge range of photos and videos out there which have been put forward as evidence of time travel, varying from truly bizarre artifacts to mind-bending historic paintings, and we're going to investigate the cream of the crop. And best of all, we'll discover how legendary physicist Albert Einstein figured out that time travel is scientifically possible, and the shocking real-world event that proved him right. So, hop aboard the Be Amazed Chronomatic 3000 and let's time travel. Got the time? Traveling to the past sounds great, but with the diseases, primitive toilets, and lack of Wi-Fi, I definitely wouldn't want to get stuck there. However, if we humor the ever so slightly wacky idea that traveling back in time can and does occur, it's fair to assume a lot can go wrong while time traveling. And what could be worse for a time traveler than losing a watch? Well, some folks believe just such a thing actually happened. Allow me to explain. In 2008, archaeologists discovered a 400-year-old tomb in China. The tomb had been sealed for centuries, but inside, encased in dirt and rocks, they found a ring carved into the unmistakable shape of a wristwatch. Strangest of all, it even had the word Swiss embossed on the side. Now, wristwatches hadn't been invented when the tomb was sealed, let alone miniature ring-sized watches like these, and Switzerland didn't even exist as a country until 1848. So the mysterious depiction of a Swiss watch led to some interesting theories. Firstly, that the person buried in the tomb was a time traveler who warped to the past with the ring and left it behind. Second theory, that the time traveler was absolutely tiny and the ring was their full-sized watch. And the third theory was, well, a more skeptical view. Skeptics argued that although the tomb hadn't been officially opened in over 400 years, somebody must have snuck in and lost the ring before the archaeologist arrived. This theory seems more likely than time travel, but others have argued that archaeologists tend to be quite good at working out whether a tomb is properly sealed, and nothing had seemingly been stolen from the tomb like you might expect from a trespasser of this kind. Harsher critics, though, suggested the discovery may never have occurred at all. While the news was shared by semi-dependable news outlets like the Daily Mail, information was somewhat scarce, and there have been no official updates since, raising questions about the authenticity of the story. These conflicting points mean that the mystery hasn't been officially solved, so at the moment it's up to you to decide for sure whether the ring is evidence of a clumsy grave robber, an unlucky time traveler who never made it back home, or a very creative journalist. But just wait until the world hears about the Rolex Tutankhamun's mummy was found wearing texting through time. Now, a time-bending watch is one thing, but how about a cell phone that has appeared in the past? The expected one was painted by Ferdinand Waldmüller in 1860, but it saw a resurgence in popularity in 2017 after people noticed that its subject is clearly texting. Some online commenters claimed that this was proof of time travel, and one even edited the object in the girl's hand so it's emitting light like a phone. These remarkably convincing, semi-altered photos went viral, so an expert in Austrian art called Gerald Weinpolter quickly set the record straight by explaining that in Waldmüller's original, the woman is actually holding a small prayer book, not an iPhone. The woman is flipping through prayers, not swiping through Tinder. But the pose is remarkably similar, and I can tell you I know a lot of people for whom their phone and the social media apps within are like a religion to them. However, Waldmüller's piece isn't the only painting that's been used as proof of time travel. This mural was painted by Umberto Romano in 1937 to honor William Pynchon, a colonist who founded Springfield, Massachusetts. Pynchon's jazzy pink shirt is supposed to be the central focus of the painting, but most people are more interested in its depiction of a Native American man scrolling on what looks unbelievably like an iPhone. So what gives here? It's definitely no prayer book. While historians have explained that the mysterious object is probably supposed to be a hand mirror or an axe head, as they were both common trade items at the time, and hand mirrors were particularly highly valued by natives. However, the way the native man is holding the object is so phone-like, it's not hard to imagine the man is actually a time traveler in disguise, live tweeting William's arrival or snapping a selfie with his bold outfit. Aside from these paintings, there's also photographic evidence seeming to suggest the existence of texting time travelers, like this photo of a mill worker in 1911. The man certainly looks like he's browsing Reddit on his lunch break, but skeptics have pointed out that you can't actually see what he's holding, and he could be looking at a notebook or a pocket watch. With all these alternative explanations, it's fair to say that the photo isn't concrete evidence of time travel. But I still can't help but wonder what people from the 1900s would be texting if phones did exist. "Hey Dollface, you're a real gas. Wanna vaudeville and chill?" Ha 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 ha. Supernatural stranger. If Hollywood's taught us anything about time travel, it's that a time traveler isn't supposed to interfere with the past. And meeting your ancestors or saving somebody's life can create a paradox that affects the present day. Unfortunately, or rather fortunately, some time travelers don't obey these rules. And back in 2019, Sardar Banerjee's life was saved by a man that he believes traveled through time. Amazingly, that very moment was actually caught on CCTV. This footage shows Sardar standing by a market in Adana, Turkey, when a stranger taps him on the shoulder. As Sardar turned around to talk to the man, he was faced with the open hatch of a truck swinging towards him. The stranger's warning gave Sardar enough time to dodge a fatal collision with the hatch, but when Sardar turned to thank him for saving his life, he'd vanished into thin air. When the footage was posted online, the mystery man was dubbed a guardian angel who traveled back in time to save Sardar's life. Unfortunately, the stranger hasn't stepped forward to confirm or deny these theories, so we still don't know who he is, whether he knew the hatch was going to swing at Sardar, or how he vanished after the incident. Now that's a proper mystery. A-list evidence. If time travelers do exist, they've done a great job of keeping a low profile. However, some of them are clearly hiding in plain sight, because there's photographic evidence that the world's most famous celebrities are capable of time travel. Jay-Z famously has 99 problems, but traveling through time ain't one. This became clear back in 2013 when the New York Public Library shared a picture of a man who looked exactly like Jay-Z, hanging out on a Harlem street corner in 1939. The two men look incredibly similar and both are from New York, though unfortunately we're unable to hear whether 1939 Jay-Z can deliver such memorable bars as his modern counterpart. The rapper isn't the only A-lister whose doppelganger has appeared in the past. Eddie Murphy's comedy career started in the 1970s, but it turns out he's been around for far longer. This photo from the 1920s shows a man who looks exactly like Murphy, and the anonymous figure even shares his mustache. The resemblance between these men is uncanny, but some people have more than one doppelganger. Vladimir Putin first became the president of Russia in the year 2000, but this photo from the 1920s makes it seem like he's been serving his country for over 100 years. This Russian soldier looks just like Putin, but this photo was taken just after the end of World War I. Putin also has another historic doppelganger who was photographed in 1941 fighting for Russia during World War II. Now, Putin wasn't born until 1952 and he never served in Russia's army. But when you compare his appearance to these mysterious soldiers, the resemblance is uncanny. This has led to accusations that Putin is either a time traveler who enjoys fighting in Russia's historic wars or a vampire who's been alive for hundreds of years. But what do you make of it? Put in your Putin theories in the comments below. Stop! Hammer time! While many alleged time travel artifacts can be easily explained away, some mysterious objects are a lot more puzzling. Back in 1936, a couple from London, Texas found this out firsthand after going for a walk and stumbling across a hammer trapped inside a rock. When they showed their discovery to some experts, they determined it was likely a type of hammer used by American blacksmiths in the late 1800s. When the hammer's owners had the surrounding rock itself analyzed in a lab, they reportedly found that it had formed over 100 million years ago when Earth was ruled by the T-Rex. The fact that an ancient rock surrounded the 19th century hammer convinced some folks that either a time traveler took the tool to the past and lost it, or that it was evidence of a long-lost mega-ancient civilization. However, geologists soon posited a more rational theory. They explained that if somebody dropped the hammer into a crack in the Cretaceous rock, minerals could gradually form around the object in just a few hundred years. To the untrained eye, this layer of minerals would look exactly like the rest of the Cretaceous rock, even though it formed far more recently. Currently, the London hammer is owned by a private collector who claims it is evidence of an ancient society, but refuses to let scientists run further tests on the minerals surrounding the tool. If you ask me, that's a pretty big red flag that his theory is a load of baloney. But boy, if it isn't fun to imagine the hammer being used by time travelers who wanted to melee battle against dinosaurs. Long dead sneakerheads. In 2016, archaeologists discovered something utterly bizarre: a 1,500-year-old pair of sneakers. These ancient artifacts were found entombed in Mongolia's Altai Mountains and closely resembled footwear designs by Adidas and K-Swiss. It's not hard to see why people interpreted this find as proof of a time-traveling sneakerhead who met their fate in ancient Mongolia. However, the archaeologists later explained that when they properly examined the discovery in a lab, they found the so-called sneakers, which testing confirmed had been produced well over a millennium ago, were actually a pair of hand-sewn leather boots that were typical of the era. Striped patterns aren't as modern as you may think, with instances of striped clothes even being described in the Hebrew Bible, and striped socks like these being worn by ancient Egyptians. So while this fashion choice is little more than a coincidence in its Adidas resemblance, it's not the only time a historic individual has been accused of wearing modern sneakers. This painting from 1652 is Portrait of a Boy by Ferdinand Bull. The piece was displayed in London's National Gallery in 2019, and during the exhibition, lots of visitors joked that the white mark on the kid's shoes closely resembled Nike's logo. The National Gallery even posted about this observation on Twitter by asking their followers to spot the modern detail in the piece. After this post went viral, some folks online started to suggest that the kid really was wearing Nike sneakers. These time travel footwear theories were bolstered by the sharing of edited photos, which rotated the white patch to make it look even more like a Nike tick. Eventually, art experts intervened, explaining that the white mark on the boy's shoe isn't a brand's logo, it's his sock. They explained that 17th century shoes were often designed with small holes in the sides that would reveal the wearer's socks. As a result, the boy's old-fashioned shoes proved better suited for a formal ball at the royal court than a three-point contest on a basketball court. Futuristic fashion. When we look through history, we can identify different time periods by their distinct fashion trends. Cavemen wore furs, the Romans wore togas, and men in the 1940s wore tailored suits and hats. Apart from this guy. Now this hipster sunglasses, printed t-shirt, and digital camera wouldn't look out of place in a modern coffee shop, but incredibly, this photo was taken in British Columbia back in 1941. The man's fit just doesn't fit the time period at all, and conspiracy theorists have argued that his futuristic fashion is evidence that he was a time traveler. The man definitely doesn't look like your average 40s gentleman, but there may be a logical explanation for his fashion choices. First, the time traveler's apparent printed graphic t-shirt is actually almost certainly a knitted jumper that bears the logo of the Montreal Maroons, an old pro hockey team that used to compete in the NHL. The Maroons disbanded completely in 1947, so it's unlikely that a man from the future would own one of their jerseys. On top of that, the man's sunglasses may be seen as a modern accessory, but they were actually widely available in the 40s. Life magazine called sunglasses a new fad back in 1938, so this guy could have easily bought a pair in 1941. Similarly, the man's camera might look modern, but small cameras like the Kodak 35 rangefinder were widely available to the public in 1941, and he could have bought one in any electronics store. All this evidence heavily suggests that the man's outfit could have been bought in the 40s, so he's probably just a stylish guy for whom the only thing time-defying is his timeless, unique wardrobe. Now, there is one outfit that's legitimately worn by the real time travelers of our world, but you'll have to stick around till later to find out what that is. Factual nonfiction. Now, this next piece of evidence isn't just a grainy photo, it's an entire book. Futility is a fiction novel written by Morgan Robertson back in 1898, and the plot follows a British ship called the Titan that sinks in the North Atlantic Ocean after hitting an iceberg. Sound vaguely familiar? When the book was released, it was moderately successful, but it received a new wave of attention 14 years after its publication, when the RMS Titanic sunk in the exact same way. Robertson's book perfectly predicted the disaster, and there are some insane similarities between the Titanic and the fictional Titan. The fictional and non-fictional ships were both luxury liners that were considered to be unsinkable. However, they both sunk in the Atlantic Ocean in April, and in both cases, there weren't enough lifeboats to save all the passengers. These similarities are pretty uncanny, so when the Titanic sunk in 1912, lots of people accused Robertson of being a time traveler who knew the tragedy was going to happen. Morgan claimed that the similarities were purely coincidental, and his book was based on his extensive knowledge of shipbuilding and his belief that an iceberg was the most likely way for a luxury liner to sink. However, not everyone was convinced, and conspiracy theorists still compare Futility's front cover with paintings of the Titanic to prove the existence of time travel. It's pretty darn creepy, so let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Freaky interference. Back in 2020, a TikToker called Snaquarius received a call from a time traveler sending her a warning from the past.
I hope it does it again.
For anyone listening to this message, get in contact with the time capsule. Tell them he's escaped and is following me. They'll find me buried in the tragedies, 265. Please hurry, I don't have much time.
Snaquarius filmed this TikTok while driving through Wollongong, Australia, and listening to a classical radio station called Fine Music Sydney. As she tried to jam out to Mozart, her radio started receiving some interference as a crackling voice stated, "You are in contact with the Time Council," along with a warning about tragedies. Views poured in on Snaquarius' TikTok as viewers theorized that the radio was picking up interference from time travelers relaying secret information. Even skeptical commenters struggled to find a rational explanation for the broadcasts, until Fine Music Sydney contacted Snaquarius and suggested a highly unexpected solution to the mystery. They explained that when her radio started receiving the creepy broadcast, she must have been driving past the Breakout Bar, an escape room in Wollongong. Why? Well, one of their puzzles requires the players to take an FM radio and find a secret frequency that will display a message from a quote-unquote time traveler. It turns out this message is played on 102.5 FM, the same frequency used by Fine Music Sydney. Usually, the Breakout Bar transmits the message at a low power level so nobody outside of the escape room can tune into it. However, on this occasion, it seems they emitted it with the wrong power settings, letting the transmission range extend beyond the building and reach Snaquarius' car, inadvertently placing her at the center of a time travel mystery. Futuristic fan. Let's move on to a truly timeless battle between two powerful forces. Back in 1995, Mike Tyson finished a 3-year stint in prison before returning to the ring and fighting Pat McNeely at the MGM Grand. Tyson's comeback was a huge event, but today it's been overshadowed by a guy in the crowd who appeared to be taking photos of Tyson with a smartphone. None of the primitive cell phones in 1995 could take photos, leading online theorizers to believe a time traveler attended the iconic fight and used a smartphone to snap some pictures. In 2020, Mike Tyson publicly acknowledged this theory on his podcast, admitting the site had freaked him out when someone shared the image with him. However, skeptics have argued that the Mystery Man's device is probably just a small camcorder like the Logitech Photoman. These camcorders were available in the 90s, and their handheld designs closely resemble the man's device, as well as sharing a vaguely similar form factor with modern smartphones. This certainly seems the likely explanation, though, to be honest, if I was a time traveler, I couldn't think of many better sporting events to travel back to than a Mike Tyson fight in the 90s. Taking calls. Let's stick with the idea of time-bending mobile phones now, shall we? This photo from 1943 shows a group of soldiers hanging out on a street in Reykjavik, Iceland, while a man in a trench coat talks on a cell phone in the background. Cell phones didn't exist in the 40s, so some people believe that the man is a time traveler, or a wartime spy using some secret technology. These theories are pretty exciting, but skeptics have pointed out that there's no way to prove them, and the man could also be doing something far less interesting, like picking some earwax out of his ear. The grainy photo is definitely inconclusive, but there's actual video evidence of somebody talking on a cell phone back in 1928. This clip is behind-the-scenes footage from The Circus, a Charlie Chaplin movie from the 20s. The sight of a cell phone in a silent movie is pretty crazy, but experts have put forward a convincing hypothesis that doesn't involve time travel. In 1924, communications technology company Siemens invented a portable hearing aid that consisted of a microphone amplifier that the user holds to their ear. This action closely mimics the way we use our cell phones, so experts agree that the mystery woman was probably using one of these devices or a similar brand. This definitely seems like the most likely explanation for the footage, but personally, I'm disappointed that the lady isn't a time-traveling grandma who hands out candy to historical figures. Through space and time. The new Cathedral of Salamanca is an impressive building in Spain that was built between 1513 and 1733. The cathedral's facade is covered in ornate carvings with depictions of mythical creatures, historical figures, and the unmistakable image of an astronaut. Now, how exactly does a spaceman end up carved onto a 500-year-old building? Is it just a coincidental look-alike? Well, no. It's definitely an astronaut. But here's why it's there. Turns out the cathedral underwent restoration works in 1992, and a restorer called Geronimo Garcia was put in charge of the project. It's traditional for restorers to add new details to an old building as a signature, and Salamanca's government allowed Geronimo to add some modern carvings to the facade, including a gargoyle eating an ice cream and an astronaut floating through space. However, these modern carvings perfectly replicate the style of the cathedral's original facade, so it really does look like a time traveler traveled to the 1500s to carve them. Migos Mystery. If time travel definitely existed, we'd all want to visit the construction of the pyramids, the dinosaurs, and a certain Austrian daycare in 1889. However, this supposed time traveler headed back to France in the 1940s helped to defeat the Axis powers and hit a dab to celebrate. Now, if you're a hip-hop dance trend enthusiast like me, you'll know that dabbing was popularized back in 2015, and our great-grandparents definitely weren't hitting them back in the 1940s. This has convinced some netizens that the British soldier in this viral image is a time traveler. Unsurprisingly, the photo has a more rational explanation. It turns out the D in D-Day doesn't stand for dab, and these hardened soldiers are actually pampered actors working as extras on the movie Dunkirk. The director, Christopher Nolan, hired over 6,000 extras to portray soldiers in his movie, and before someone altered this photo with a black and white filter, it clearly showed one of them dabbing to celebrate the end of a long day on set, instead of victory in Europe. This footage of a moon landing Fortnite dance, though, completely real. Totally real. Phony fossils. Back in 2016, a British newspaper called The Express claimed that archaeologists had found something remarkably strange during a dig in Austria. The object closely resembled a cell phone from the 90s, but when the archaeologists dated it in a lab, they found that it was over 800 years old. They also determined that its keypad was written in cuneiform, an ancient form of writing that was used 5,500 years ago in the Middle East. The Express implied that the cuneiform keypad was evidence of time travel. However, as their article went viral online, an artist called Carl Weingartner stepped forward to explain that the artifact was actually one of his sculptures. Weingartner created the sculpture in 2012, but when he posted photos of it online, conspiracy forums started reposting them alongside the fake story about the Austrian archaeologists. When the Express reported their story in 2016, they failed to share the artifact's actual origin. Unfortunately, despite the Express being a popular newspaper, it's often been guilty of presenting false, sensationalist headlines just like this. So remember folks, be careful where you get your news. While old Nokia phones may be ultra durable and hella versatile, their range of specs doesn't quite cover time travel, as far as we know. A similarly sensationalist incident occurred in 2009 when an N64 controller from the 90s was allegedly discovered fossilized in rock. Conspiracy theorists went wild, noting that it takes at least 10,000 years for fossils to form, and so the time travel beacons were lit once again. In reality, the device and its encasement were created by an artist called Christopher Locke as part of his Modern Fossils exhibit. Locke created the exhibition by taking pieces of technology from different decades and casting them in concrete. Locke's fossilized AirPods and brick phones were sculpted in a workshop, but similar artifacts have been created accidentally. One example of this occurred back in 2020 when a web user shared a pic of a genuine Nokia phone they'd found encased in rock. As the post went viral, nobody was certain how it became trapped inside the stone. One theory is that construction workers must have accidentally poured liquid mortar over a misplaced phone while cementing a pathway. This theory hasn't been proven, but it would explain how the cell phone got trapped inside the stone. Or so the cold-calling time travelers would have us believe. True time travel. So far, we've debunked a lot of bogus time travel evidence. But could time travel really be possible as far as science is concerned? Well, surprisingly, yes. Now, full disclaimer, scientists haven't figured out how to travel to the past. But back in 1905, Albert Einstein proved that traveling to the future is possible. It turns out this is the most convincing photo that can prove time travel is real, because this chalkboard holds Einstein's theory of special relativity. This theory and its general relativity counterpart are pretty famous. But most people don't know that parts of these theories detail how the speed at which an object is traveling and its distance from a massive gravitational source, like the Earth, can affect how the object experiences time. Sounds kinda wooey, doesn't it? Well, that's what the rationally minded manufacturers of some of the first GPS satellites thought too. Yet, when they sent their satellites up, which featured atomic clocks accurate to the nanosecond, they were astounded by what they found. Within minutes of activation compared to the clocks they had on Earth, the internal clocks of the satellites were running very slightly faster, by enough of a factor to render the GPS readings useless. Within hours, the GPS readings were inaccurate by tens of miles. From that point on, GPS satellites had to have built-in compensation systems because they inadvertently proven Einstein's theories right. To get specific as to how, Einstein's theory of special relativity states that an object moving faster relative to another will experience time slower. The theory of general relativity, meanwhile, tells us that time runs faster for an object the further it is from a source of gravity. These two principles working together in space seemingly at opposites don't quite cancel out, and general relativity tends to win as far as things orbiting the Earth are concerned. This means objects orbiting Earth typically experience time as moving faster than on Earth, unless they're orbiting a lot faster than the Earth is spinning. By contrast, Einstein calculated that if you escaped the Earth's gravity in a futuristic spaceship and flew into deep space at 95% of the speed of light for 10 years, something mind-boggling would occur. Thanks to time dilation at those high speeds, you would have experienced that time slower than folks on Earth, meaning those 10 years for you would have equated to 32 years for those Earthlings. It's pretty hard to wrap your head around, but because of all this, we can factually say time travelers do indeed walk the Earth. That being every person who has spent an extended period up in space. As if they couldn't get any cooler already, right? Save some for the rest of us, you spacefaring time-traveling hunks. Well, with that physics lesson, it's time to wrap up our look at the photos that supposedly prove time travel exists. Do you think I debunked all the photos, or do you still believe that time travelers walk among us? Let me know in the comments below, and thanks for watching.